Everyone.
Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise podcast, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. We've got a really special episode today. We've been sort of planning this for quite a while, actually, a few maybe months even. And we were approached by Jennifer, who's with us today, about maybe doing an episode, and it's turned into sort of like a 3-part mini-series about living with ME and cancer. And I'm really pleased to say Jen's joined us today. And we've also got Litsa Dremousis. Did I get your name nearly right?
Yeah, you did.
um, who's a friend of the show, and she's a returning guest, which is brilliant to have her. And Litsa's kind of been living with cancer as well. So when Jennifer sort of mentioned this, I thought, oh, Litsa would be a brilliant person to talk to again. And Dove's here, and we're all ready to go. So yeah, thank you. And it's just a quick sort of disclaimer that any sort of medical advice or discussion that kind of takes place today is purely sort of the views of each individual person, and none of us are sort of medically trained, and we're not putting across anything that we say as sort of advice. We're just kind of giving experiences. So that's just to sort of to begin with. So Jennifer, would you like to maybe tell us a bit maybe about your ME chronic illness story, and then also about your cancer story, and just share with us your kind of like journey with this, and why it felt so important for you to raise it, and to hopefully have something that's out there on the internet that covers both these issues. So yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. I became sick in 2020. It was not COVID related. A lot of people ask that because of the year, but I'm not exactly sure why I got sick. Just the standard story for a lot of people of getting sick and just not getting better. It was at first diagnosed with POTS. And for those who do know POTS, they say to, exercise. There's a protocol, and people do get better with that. But I kept getting worse and worse. But I trusted people, right? I trusted doctors until it all just came to a head, and I became paralyzed and couldn't handle lights or sounds or movements. I was in the hospital for a while, and they wanted to release me to a nursing home. Well, rehabilitation. I refused to do it. I did slowly get better at home, to the point where I was in bed 24/7. I could maybe make occasional trips to the bathroom. But other than that, it was always dark, quiet room, 24/7, trying to make time to see my 3 children, at least. Any spare energy was for them. It was in probably a year ago, I felt a lump in my right breast. I really did not think anything of it. I thought I was 41 years old at the time, no history of it in the family. I thought it's probably nothing. And we all know how hard it is to get to medical appointments when you're feeling unwell. Eventually, I did go to get it checked out, and I was so unwell that day. I do have a special wheelchair that reclines fully so that I can lay down upon going out, and an amazing husband. He is my full-time caregiver. He does everything for me. But I was too unwell to do the mammogram they wanted to do, but they were able to do an ultrasound. But I said, okay, that's fine. And then they told me I need to have it biopsy. I still didn't think anything of it, right? But we got the imaging back for it, and it was obviously a cancerous tumor. I knew immediately. So even before my biopsy, I was pretty sure. But I had the biopsy, and it was confirmed that it was breast cancer. And the plan was to remove the whole breast, which they did in December. They took out lymph nodes. In imaging, they saw nothing in the lymph nodes, so they thought it was all contained in the breast. When they did take out the lymph nodes for testing, though, they did find cancer in the lymph nodes. So they said I would need chemo at that point. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I have heard some things about people with ME feeling better on chemotherapy and even improving for years after. I've talked to at least one woman who's had found an improvement, and I was very, very hopeful for that. When I talked to the doctor about chemo, I knew I needed special accommodations. I knew I needed a bed. What they provided was reclining chair. That wasn't enough. I needed a dark, quiet room, so I was away from the people talking and the beeping machines. And fortunately, they were able to provide this for me. They were able to make a room just for me to have chemotherapy in. And that helped a lot with having to deal with the stress of just going out. I have to think. I did the chemo. I did 4 rounds of AC. They call it the red double because it's red in color, and they have to IV push it because it's so reactions to it. I had reactions to a lot. I ended up having seizures. Another allergic reaction where I started having trouble breathing. I moved on from the 4 ACs chemos to a weekly Taxol chemo. I could not handle doing it weekly. I told the doctor I wanted to quit. And she said, how about we do every other week? And I said, okay, we'll do that. And so I was going in every other week, you know. My very last chemo I was so happy that it was over. And I was so happy to ring that bell. But then I had a severe reaction, lost consciousness. They called an ambulance, and I woke up in the hospital. And I never got to ring that bell. And that was very upsetting to me. But still, I'm glad that it's all over. But my recovery from it, my baseline, has absolutely been worse. I can't talk to my children. I'm having to be fed. And I'm still hoping for that miracle of it just somehow getting better. I'm still holding out that hope. But I will say I did find a support group in fellow ME people. They didn't have cancer, so it was just ME, but still they were wonderful people. And they really helped me through it. Right now I'm considered in remission. I have to take hormone therapy to suppress the hormones. The tumor was heavily hormone related. I found out I would have to take shots to reduce the hormones my ovaries produce. And this will be every 6 weeks for years, because until I would be in natural menopause. And I'm a little upset with my doctor in not mentioning this, because she thought, it won't be that big of a deal to come out to my office every 6 weeks. But it is, because I could have had the option to have the ovaries removed. And I could have had that done at the same time they removed the breast. And so now that's another thing. I have to decide, have the ovaries removed in another operation, or go in every 6 weeks to have these shots, or not do them at all. Those are my only options in this. I was supposed to do radiation, but that was every single day, and there was no way I could go out and do that. So I denied doing that. it ups my risk of it returning, but I can't see myself getting any worse and, keep going at this rate. So right now I'm done with treatment, except just go back in for the shots and take my hormone pills.
Wow.
And that's my story.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. It just sounds, even just like you're telling the story, it feels, I can imagine having such a severe level of ME. Yeah, maybe some things that some people would do without thinking too much about having to go to appointments. The impact of that on us when we've got to do something like that is huge. Just to get out of the house and then to be expected to do that maybe like every day, for example, it's like it must be like it must feel like a no-win situation for you somehow to it's like not a choice, is it, for you, because you've got to kind of do it to get the treatment, but then at the same time there's got to be a discussion there about your quality of life as well. And has that been quite a difficult process for you in terms of having to decide what you let go and what you do and what you've got to do going forward?
That was very hard. I mean, I definitely contended with doing nothing. Um, I was stage 2B, meaning the tumor was 4 centimeters. If it had reached 5, I would have been stage 3, but it hadn't. Um, but doing the treatment at all, especially the chemo, was something I really didn't want to do. But I thought, I have these kids, my youngest being 12, and I have an obligation, I feel like, to stick around for them because, I brought them to this world, and I have the obligation to stay there to raise them. So I did all that I could.
Wow.
Daniel, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, anybody jump in, it's fine.
Jennifer, if you don't mind my asking, if you did not have children, would you feel compelled to continue with treatment?
No.
That's understandable.
I think the most I would have done is the surgery to remove it. Because that was...
Thanks so much for your candor in all of this, because it's so hard to talk about.
It is, but I do feel it's so important to talk about it and not tell people, because some people are like, you have to keep fighting, you have to. And it's like, I am fighting every single day.
I don't understand why people say that to everyone with cancer, fight. And it's like, we evolved to fight. A single cell organism will fight to stay alive. So it's just telling you something you're already doing.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's the messaging of like it's our job to be these warriors when, I think that metaphor can sort of takes a very complex situation and tries to turn it into this like simple inspirational idea. And I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how to have some quality of life, and fighting can be something that takes away from the little quality of life that we have. So I think sometimes figuring out how to how to choose the things that bring us small amounts of meaning and joy, like with Jennifer, with you, it sounds like your relationship with your kids is the thing that makes you kind of want to be here, even though you're dealing with such tremendous hardship. And so how do you maximize like your capacities to spend time with your kids? And it sounds like right now that's not something that you're able to do. I'm curious, when you found out that you got cancer and you were looking for any kind of resources, like if you feel up to talking about it, what are the things that you wish you could have found that you couldn't find, and what are things that did sort of help you?
Number one, for my type of cancer, it's considered estrogen and progesterone positive. I wish I had understood what those numbers meant, because they were percentages with them, and they were high percentages. I think estrogen was 75% and progesterone was 90%, meaning it was highly fed by my hormones, while other ones can be for different reasons. I didn't know there were so many different uh, breast cancers. And if I had known in the beginning that the ovaries were the number one problem, the one thing they can control to keep it from coming back, if I had known that information, I would have asked the questions about the removal to have that one surgery. But it was never brought up because it was more assumed I wouldn't want that. I was never asked that. It was never brought up until the very end of this treatment. They say, this is what we do next. So I wish they had given me the information in the beginning and let me decide.
To let you decide, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Did you find that as somebody with ME that it was harder to find appropriate information, or did you find that there were people who had ME that were able to guide you at all, or did you kind of feel on your own?
I wasn't able to find anyone who, I guess, fit the bill. I found someone who did have cancer and she took a pill. So it wasn't quite the same as having to go in, which is that difficult part of it. She also got better. She was also well enough to do radiation, although, she said it was very hard, of course. It is absolutely hard for anybody to go through that, even if you start out healthy. But I couldn't find anyone that was severe ME that was going through exactly what I was. And I had friends that were really there and were supportive and everything. But nobody, fully understood.
And so do you think the doctors didn't tell you important things because of like these assumptions that they make? Do you think that there's ways, like if you could go back, like, or if you could, like if somebody else were in a similar situation, like what kind of questions do you think you could ask to make sure that they're not withholding information based on some assumptions? Like, what, I don't understand that, but like I guess people make assumptions of changes people would and wouldn't want to make.
It's so hard because there are so many different types of cancers, and it's not a one all be all. And mine is very specific to mine, and I would have asked, what do these numbers mean? And I tried looking for some things, but pinpointing that to what the answer I wanted was nothing that I could find. I also did have trouble just looking for information because I was often too unwell to use a computer,
I guess it's also about having the cognitive ability to process the information that you're given, because that's sometimes difficult. When I find is like if I'm at an appointment or with a family member or something, and then having to kind of like take in the information and then retain it and then try and make sense of it as well. Was that something that was quite a challenge with you because of the kind of the brain fog element of the ME, or was that something that was a part of the cancer as well, or how did you find that?
Yes. The brain fog, the getting too exhausted in an appointment, to keep talking or explaining my questions and everything. My husband was a big help, and we would try to talk about things beforehand so he could ask them himself.
Mm.
I'm very, I wouldn't say trusting of doctors, but have a hard time putting my opinion in, I guess. I don't want a confrontation. I was very scared to tell my radiologist that I couldn't um do it, because I really thought she would be pushy and just think, oh, you don't understand. When in reality, it's them that doesn't understand. But
Right.
she was kind, so I appreciated that.
And that makes a lot of difference, doesn't it? Like just kindness, from a medical professional, it makes a big difference in terms of how it puts you at ease a little bit more, and it also kind of like helps to kind of ease that process, doesn't it? Yeah, it's
It really does, and cancer doctors in general, I would say, are kinder than at least what I found with other doctors. Because you are believed. I've had chronic pain, and that's always been a fight to get meds. But once I had the cancer and I asked for pain meds, it was like, here, go ahead, have it. It's believed. I will say with my breast surgeon did not go well. She was very kind when I met her. Very wonderful and caring and nice. But the day of the surgery was a complete different story. I need extra IV meds. I have a port, and I do get daily IV fluids. And in my other doctor, my GP and my POTS ME doctor said, she needs extra fluid. And for some reason, she fought that. When I saw her before surgery, she was very irritated with me on how I was slow to answer her questions. She was not happy that I wanted the lights off. She made me remove my sunglasses so I could look her in the eye. And when she went to leave the room, she's like, well, maybe you're too sick to have the surgery. And I told her I absolutely am too sick to have the surgery. And she looked at me as if, she expected me to say, no, I'm okay, I can do it. No. I was like, I will walk right out of here right now. And she was like, no, well, you already signed the papers. We'll go ahead and do it. And of course, that made me have an emotional meltdown because I was upset. I didn't want to be there. I did not want to do it at all. It's obviously hard for men to understand this, but it is hard to lose a piece of yourself, even if it's to save your life. I was so upset with her and refused to see her again that I removed my own drains. Don't do this, people. Might not even want to put in the podcast. I don't know. But check them out myself.
But if you felt that was necessary and that was your best option, then you were protecting yourself.
Yep. I do not want to go see her again. And I never will. If I somehow needed something else, I would never use her again.
I don't know. Did you find this, Jennifer? And this might take us too far off track, but in my experience, sometimes the worst doctors for women's healthcare, paradoxically, are other women. And in my experience, I think we've got two factors. It's such a traditionally masculine profession that I think still to this day, too many women feel that in order to succeed as a physician, they have to play the game and they have to be kind of dude-like. And then secondly, I think sometimes our illness and our vulnerability scare them, because what's happening in our bodies when it's uniquely female, it can happen to them too. And if we're vulnerable, they're vulnerable. And it's a strange, I mean, I'm 57 now, and I've seen this again and again. A lot of my worst doctors have been women. And when I was younger, I had such high expectations that, oh, when there are more women doctors, it's all going to get better. Like, no, I don't think it's worse, but it's certainly not better.
I pretty much all of my doctors are women. The oncologist was a woman. The radiologist was a woman. My GP is a woman, and my POPS / ME is a woman. So I've only had bad occasions with the surgeon, who was a female as well. So it can happen. But for me, they were mostly kind and good.
Good.
I did call the what is it, Susan? I'm so sorry, I can't remember. Susan K. Foundation.
Is it Susan Komen?
Thank you, yes. To try to advocate for mammograms that can be done laying down, if it's at all possible, because they did eventually have to do a mammogram. And I couldn't physically do it myself, but my husband was like, amazing, because they would be like, you need this position, and he would get me into that position before I could even process what they said to me. So without him, I couldn't have done it. But I'm sure like nurses could help too. But still, we need options for people that can't stand and do it. I was able to sit to do it, but there should be better options.
Yeah. So Litsa, what's, I know kind of we touched when you joined us, sort of, it was Christmas, it was like half a year ago now. It was incredible.
No, 6 months ago.
And you sort of mentioned a bit about your cancer experience, but we didn't kind of go into detail because we were all over the place, weren't we? We had a really wide ranging conversation. But do you want to tell us a bit about your cancer story and the impact of that on your ME?
Sure. For context, I've had ME since 1991, and I'm 57. I have had thyroid cancer for at least since 2016. It was misdiagnosed for over 2 years. My primary care physician, and I should retroactively say that when I was discussing women doctors, I'm an ardent feminist. I've been calling myself since I was 7 years old, which is why it's so crushing and disappointing when women doctors are misogynistic. I had a female PCP who insisted for over 2 years that all of my new symptoms, I kept saying something's different, something's wrong. And she kept saying it's menopause. And that's the flip side of, on one hand, menopause is just dismissed entirely. Like, oh, you have one hot flash, you're fine. And we're only now learning, the body, it's this total reconstitution of the body. On the other hand, they'll just pin anything on menopause. Like, oh, it's menopause. And I was getting worse and worse and worse. I developed paralysis in my right leg. And I had naturally been slim most of my life. And I had some perimenopausal weight gain, like 8 or 9 pounds in about a 2 or 3 year period. And then in a year, I put on 30 pounds. And I kept telling her something is wrong. My leg hair was falling out. I was losing my eyebrows. I have a lot of hair, thank God, but I was losing a lot of it. Not to be unduly graphic, all my pubic hair fell out. It was like, what is happening? And she would make these little jokes. Well, people go to a spa to do that. It's like, this shit is not funny. Something is wrong. And she didn't even send me to an endocrinologist. And I retroactively know I was textbook thyroid cancer. My throat had gotten larger, which you'd think would have been the tip off. And I'd even mentioned it to her. And Jennifer, when you talked about my sunglasses, at that point I was wearing my sunglasses almost all the time because the cancer was intensifying all my ME symptoms. And that also bugged that doctor. And the last conversation she and I had before I switched doctors, I rarely cry in physician's office. I will try and hold it together till I'm out. And in this case, I just couldn't hold it together. I threw my sunglasses on the ground and burst into tears and said, "You're not listening to me." And at this point, I was on the walker and I got out of there. In a few months after that, I ended up in the emergency room, unable to breathe. My oxygen level was plummeting. My heart rate was skyrocketing. As it turned out, I had stage 3 papillary carcinoma, which is one of the 5 forms of thyroid cancer, and the tumors in my case were impinging on my trachea. So this bad cold sent me to the ER. The first time I had to go to the ER twice in 36 hours. The first time they sent me home, they thought I was a drug seeker. And it's like, what? Because one of the cough suppressants has hydrocodone in it. And it's like, what the fuck is happening? I can't breathe. You've got this objective measurement that I have no oxygen and a really crazily high heart rate. Something's going wrong. I'm not a drug seeker. So less than 36 hours, I'm back. Same thing. I cannot breathe. And my mom and my brother were there. And just by awful chance, my father had died only 16 days before. And our family is very close. So that there was just so much going on. Like, Dad has just died. Boom, I'm in the emergency room. And the first time they're telling me I'm a drug seeker. The second time they're telling me, the physician's assistant actually made up a diagnosis. He said, "You have post-viral coughing syndrome," which does not exist. It's just stringing words together. And Daniel, before we started taping today, you and I were discussing white privilege and the privilege that comes with being educated. I've written about this, but I firmly believe if I had not been an educated white woman who is well connected with my attorney mom in the room, I think they might have called security, because the second time they told me to go home, I refused. I said, "I'm not going anywhere without a CT scan." And it got really heated. And I listed all the material errors that they'd made in the previous 36 hours. And again, this is a card that I'm extremely lucky I get to play. I pointed to my mom and I said, "Do you see her? She's an attorney." I pointed to my brother. I said, "Do you see him? His wife's an attorney. If you guys send me home and I die, all of our nights are about to get a lot worse." Well, this is a card everyone can play. And by the way, they knew that I was writing for the Washington Post health section. You'd think that would have been sufficient. Like, I'm taking notes. Anytime I could breathe, I was taking notes. That was insufficient to scare them. It was the possibility of a lawsuit that forced their hand, and they administered a CT scan. And sure enough, wow, we got a bunch of tumors in there. And then I had to have an ultrasound, and that corroborated, yeah, it's looking like thyroid cancer. And then I had to have a biopsy where they went in and put the needle in 5 times into my neck and took out different samples. And that confirmed it. By the time I had the biopsy, I was certain I had thyroid cancer, because the CT scan in the ER had indicated probable thyroid cancer. Well, once I started reading up on the symptoms, I was textbook. It was like, holy shit, how did this get missed for over 2 years? The paralysis in my leg, I later learned just by chance. Kind of like what Jennifer was saying, when you try and figure out what is causing what all of us have had to do. I was trying to figure out what's the ME, what's the cancer. Well, when the paralysis had started in my right leg, there was a good neurologist who tried, and he ran every battery of tests he could think of. And he was, again, one of the good ones. He believed ME is real. He knew it was disabling, degenerative, potentially fatal. And he said, "I cannot tell you why your leg is paralyzed, but I know something's going wrong." So he was emotionally supportive. Like we were saying, the kindness goes so far. Only later last year, when I was continuing to do research on thyroid cancer, did I stumble across, just by accident, 2 different studies. And that's how I learned thyroid cancer can cause muscle paralysis. It's not common, but it is a well-documented side effect where the brain, because the thyroid cancer, your thyroid gland is right here, or was here in my case, and it's small, but it oversees your metabolic rate, and it can oversee your mood and your body temperature and cognitive abilities. And so when cancer starts growing on your thyroid gland, it can scramble the brain signals to your muscles, and it can induce muscle paralysis. So I asked my current primary care physician, I said, that's got to be what happened, right? And he said, yeah. He said, did no one talk to you about this? I said, no. Which is a recurring theme, I think, for a lot of us. Once you have ME and then you get something else, the best advice I would have for anyone, if you can, like Jennifer was saying with her husband, my mom came to a lot of my appointments. A number of my friends were rotating. In 2019, I had 74 either doctor appointments, emergency room, or surgeries. So that's why I had to sell my home, because with the U.S. healthcare system, that's going to bleed you dry. So I had to sell my home. And there were just so many appointments. I had to be alone for a lot of them. But for about 12, which still means 60 of them, I was alone. For about 12, though, I had loved ones in the room with me. I'm lucky in that I'm used to taking notes at all times. But it's so much easier when a loved one will volunteer. My friend Lynn just did a couple doctor appointments this year. And it's just so much easier if you have a trusted loved one in the room who can take notes for you, because going to Jennifer's point, you were absorbing so much information. You were so physically vulnerable, emotionally just completely overwhelmed. I think now, 5 years later, now that there's not even a scintilla of doubt that ME is physiological in origin, now that the National Institutes of Health study corroborated what a million other researchers had already concluded, that this is physiological in origin, my hope is that moving forward, both for ME and people with ME who then get cancer, that our cancer doctors will take the ME a lot more seriously. There is a considerable body of research indicating that people with ME have higher rates of cancer. And Daniel, as we discussed before we started taping, I know of at least 2 who have ME and who have thyroid cancer like me who don't discuss it publicly. And I think it's just because we all know what the stigma is like from ME, and they don't want the additional stigma of the cancer on top of that. And we all know cancer, as I've joked, but no one has a neutral reaction when they hear the word cancer. And I've written that cancer is like a magnet. It's going to pull people closer to you, or it's going to repel them. But no one hears the word cancer and just shrugs it off. But if you're fortunate enough to have a loved one to accompany you, because that was the problem for me too. I was becoming too ill to get to the hospital for treatment. And to a person, my doctors just did not understand. And there was so much pushback that if I would just try harder, and I would explain to them, trying really hard, that's how I'm here in the first place. At Swedish Hospital, they accidentally, quote unquote, had 2 different schedules going for me. And so I would show up and they'd say, you're here on the wrong day. And I said, read my email. This is when you told me to show up. So finally, my mom figures out they had 2 different schedules in play for me. And again, things that an attorney can get away with that no one else can. She made the scheduler, 2 nurses, and a doctor sit down in the room with us. And she said, no one is leaving this room until we figure out the schedule. And she said, you have had her coming back and forth on days she doesn't even need to be here. She can't walk. Because I didn't have a thyroid gland, and in order to get ready for the radiation, they had to take me off my thyroid medication. Well, it means you have 0 energy whatsoever. And if you've already got ME, it was just the double whammy, okay? I responded horribly to the thyroid gene. I had a horrible allergic reaction to it. So we had to do I won't take up the whole, I'm going to truncate a lot. We had to do a much longer course of treatment that hadn't been done. It's not regularly done anymore. It used to be common in the 80s. Thyrogen was kind of the magic bullet of thyroid cancer, but I'm allergic to it. And so I had to be iodine free for a month. Again, all of you will understand with ME, we are so sensitive to any nutritional or chemical disruption that when I was able to eat any kind of salt again, I gained 9 pounds of fluid in 6 days. And I've got the photos of everything. My face just ballooned. I couldn't urinate at all. To this day, 5 years later, I'm on a diuretic. And one of the things all of my cancer doctors have told me is we have simply never seen anyone react this way before. Before I had thyroid cancer surgery, before the thyroidectomy, I had sent my surgeon research on ME. I sent him the Institutes of Medicine report. I sent him shorter pieces. You're going to need to know this, because he kept saying, he kept calling it the good cancer because the fatality rate with mine is only 2%, which is good. I'm not debating that. But he kept saying, we'll take out your thyroid gland, you'll do the radiation. For the rest of your life, you'll be on levothyroxine, the Synthroid, also known as Synthroid. And I was already on that because a lot of people with ME have lower rates of thyroid to start with. So I was already on it, but we were going to have to change the dose, and you're going to be fine. And he would just kind of shrug. And I was presenting the research. He wouldn't read it. And he said, my primary care physician, he said, Mark, because it was Mark, said, Mark will be your quarterback. He said, Mark's going to do that for you. Well, of course, my primary care physician wouldn't do it either. And I kept explaining to all of them when they were saying, we've never seen this before. There's a reason you were seeing it. It is 99.9% certain that ME is the culprit here. And for months, I could only stay upright for 15, 20 minutes a day. I'm really lucky in that people were helping me. And at that time, I lived in a part of town that, the grocery store was across the street and just everything was right there. I haven't been able to drive since 2010, so most of my adult life, I've lived somewhere where this stuff is. But I was really grateful. Because my dad had just died, it was just doubly hard for my mom and for my brother. And I know people say this about cancer all the time, but it's true. The whole family ends up going through it. If you've got any connection to your family, it's not just you who's going through it all. Everyone ends up going through it. And as my mom kept saying, she would have rather been told that she had cancer than to hear that her daughter had cancer. And I didn't want my mom to have it. I don't want anyone to have it. Going to Jennifer's point, I still have it. The radiation did not work. It has spread to a couple of lymph nodes. And I have to have quarterly ultrasounds and a million blood panels, blah, blah, blah. But I've talked to my loved ones. If, God forbid, if this spreads to some other part of my body, I'm not going to attempt chemo. If I'm this sick 5 years later from one dose of radioactive iodine, I can't withstand chemo. I'm having another surgery in September. The radiation destroyed my salivary glands. And on September 6th, I'm having surgery to have them repaired. Last summer, I had to have one of my molars extracted because the lack of saliva is as damaging as radiated saliva. And I'm not getting nearly enough saliva. So I've got 4 broken molars. One has come out. The other 3 have to come out. And then I'm supposed to have 4 bone grafts. Well, one of my doctors wanted me to do this all in 2024. And I said, no, I cannot. I cannot do 6 to 8 surgeries in 1 year because we're going to be going in reverse. We're just going to make me sicker. You guys know this. It's such a battle when you have ME to constantly be presenting research. And there's really no excuse in 2024 for doctors to remain as ignorant as they are. I don't care how they were trained when they were in med school 30 years ago. New illnesses evolve. They need to keep up. And if they can't keep up, as I've explained to more than one doctor, if you are not going to read the research, you are ceding that part of my treatment to me. And I am an expert on this because most of us with ME have to become experts with it. But if you're not going to do, in the US, the legal term is your duty to care. If you're not going to adhere to your duty to care, then you're going to have to defer to me. I'm comfortable with confrontation. You know, I'm Greek, so maybe it's just genetic, but I would love to not have to be confrontational. I would like to go in and just have my doctors know what I have and how the two illnesses are interacting with one another. Going to Jennifer's point, the only good thing about cancer is no one doubted that I had it. I had thyroid cancer, and end of story. And even when you're explaining it to loved ones, everyone knows what cancer is. So I'm not saying it was good. I would say dealing with doctors and cancer is far easier than dealing with doctors and ME.
But the cancer and the ME, like doctors being so unwilling to kind of look at, I mean, I wonder if that's true for other illnesses, or if, you know, like whenever you have more than one serious illness, like you have to be willing to kind of understand the interaction of those illnesses and how it affects medication. And the fact that doctors were just utterly like, resentful and resistant. And it's, I think, and I, you know, I, in other contexts with doctors, I've gotten into conflicts because of their refusal to learn about ME, to look at research, and they become, I think they have a belief in their own authority.
That's so wonderfully polite. Yes.
And you know, it can be deadly. It's cruel, and it's exhausting, and it's wild to me that you have two serious illnesses and they're absolutely unwilling to look at how that is shaping your unique needs.
Thank you. Where it gets even crazier and more dangerous, going to your exact point, in November of 2022, I had a small heart attack. So now you've got, and again, we know people with ME have higher rates of heart attacks, and I've had severe POTS. When I was diagnosed, I was diagnosed so long ago, it wasn't called POTS and it wasn't called orthostatic intolerance. It was called neurally mediated hypotension. I got ME in 91. By 92, because I'd been in a wheelchair for 4 months and had to have mild physical therapy, which might have done more damage than good, but at least my muscles were no longer atrophied. But I had the worst case ever. When I was diagnosed with what I call orthostatic intolerance, I had the worst case ever documented at Providence Hospital. When I did the tilt table test, if you have POTS, what we're now calling POTS, but you might pass out at the hour mark of the tilt table test. I passed out at 7 minutes and 37 seconds. And my blood pressure dropped to 37/17, and I went into shock. And paradoxically, when I came out of all of this, I was not happy, but it was the first time I had an objective marker that no doctor could refute. And indeed, the doctor who ordered that test only did so because my mom and I kept pushing him to do it. And he kept saying, you don't have it. And I'm like, I've got every symptom of it. And going to your point, Dove, about how they don't like their authority question, he was so pissed off that I was right. Like, how are you mad? I'm finding out I've got the worst documented case you guys have on history, and somehow you're in a bad mood. Yeah. I have faith in individual doctors at this point, but after August 17th, we'll make 33 years with ME. And I've had cancer, like I said, for roughly 7. I've now had the heart complications for about 2. The orthostatic intolerance for 32. I don't have faith in doctors as a whole. And that is born of experience. I wish I had faith in doctors. When I first got sick, I had enormous faith in doctors. And I did for like the first year or two. But in 91, 92, I was told so many times that I was doing it for attention, that I was lying, that I was secretly depressed. When I cited Hillary Johnson's work in Rolling Stone, she was one of the groundbreaking journalists who started covering ME in the 80s. One of my doctors told me it was the power of suggestion. And I said, I read her work in 1985. How did I get sick 6 years later from the power of suggestion? I had a doctor tell me that I was sick because I'd moved earlier in the year. And I told him, I said, people move all the time. They're not in a wheelchair. And one of the things that has taken me longer to write about that whole era is it was so deeply traumatizing. And I know that's true for all of us. Before the internet, you're too sick to see people. I lost some friends, not all of them, but I definitely lost some. And for all of us who get sick when you're young, you know that your peers are going on without you and you're stuck in bed. And I led the support group from 92 to 94 in Seattle. And again, I was very lucky. My parents drove me. They brought food for everyone. Because so many of us were being told we were lying, a lot of people were getting kicked out of their homes. Their partners were leaving them. Their families were leaving them. They were living in public housing. And when my parents realized how dire it was, Mom started making these great meals for everyone, and she would bring Tupperware and foil so people would have food to take home with them. She was making baklava, which is kind of the greatest Greek statement ever, but she would make baklava for everyone so they could take it home. One woman in the group was my age, and her father had disowned her and insisted she was lying. And she just broke down sobbing, and my dad just held her while she sobbed. In my family, we've had normal ups and downs like all families. You know, sometimes you want to throttle each other. But where I'm really, really, really lucky, at no point did my parents or my brother ever doubt that this was physiological in origin. So when I had doctors telling me that I was making it up, not only was I saying, no, you're wrong, I had my parents saying you're wrong. And that was a giant advantage. But it's crazy that I'm 57 and I'm only now effectively able to write about all of this. Because for a long time, I couldn't even talk about it. You know, I could talk about it with my therapist or one or two friends, but there's stuff to this day a lot of my friends don't even know. It was just too traumatizing. At that age, I had zero power in the situation. Any power I had was loaned to me by my parents. And thank God they were willing to go to bat for me. But it does something to you. You know, if you're that sick and you're told repeatedly that you're lying, and you know you're not crazy, you know you're not lying. Also, as I would point out to them, depression is a potentially fatal illness. So when they'd say, oh, you're just depressed, it's like, well, you shouldn't be dismissing that either. You know? What is wrong with you guys? So yeah, at this point, I have very, very, very little faith in the healthcare establishment, at least in the U.S. I can't speak to Britain. Yeah. But in the U.S., it's just kind of a travesty. And there are individuals who are good, who care. They're smart and they care. But in my experience, they're few and far between.
And it seems like it seems like at some point in every episode of this podcast, we come back to this issue of like medical gaslighting and whatever that is and whatever you want to call it, or, you know, there's people out there that say, oh, there's no such thing as medical gaslighting or whatever. I mean, it's
bullshit.
It's a new, yeah, I know, but that's what you get sometimes, and it's like whatever you want to call it, whatever terminology we want to use, whether it's a new term or an old term or whatever. But this attitude proceeds about, particularly around ME, and then. In terms of how it, you know, the substance of it, whether it's a real condition, and that still proceeds today, and it's it's frustrating, isn't it? And then with the cancer on top, do you find, I don't know, Jen, whether you find that is, have you been treated differently in terms of doctors giving more credence because of the cancer, or I don't know.
Because of other things too, like I have seizures, I have diabetes. I don't know why, like, they took better care of me once they knew. I had cancer. I mean, I don't know if you've ever even done a podcast about like medical abuse, but I could tell you several stories on that. I don't know if you ever heard of an OI. It's where they need to do an IV and they drill through your leg, your shin, your bone to insert an IV. And they did this on an ambulance while I was still conscious because they said, we can't do an IV because you might have another seizure. And that's dangerous. So you're going to drill through my bone? It was probably the worst ever. And they, like, if you look that up, they do that on people that are about to die. It's like the last option. I felt like, in my personal opinion on this, and I know this is getting off track a bit, that they didn't believe my seizures were real. And so they were doing this as almost like a form of punishment.
Wow.
God.
Because, I mean, I screamed and they kept doing it. It's like I was not in a state where I needed an IV. I wasn't about to die on them. Or they needed IV access. But they still chose to do that.
Wow.
Jennifer, I'm so sorry. That's so brutal.
One thing I wanted to say about the cancer, especially with people with kids, is thought of, and talking to kids if you have it. For me, I thought they should know what was going on. They're 19, 16, and 12. But also for me, it was important to tell them individually so each child could get their emotions out and get the attention for their feelings alone. Because if they all three, then, comfort one child, this other child might not get anything, at least in my family. So that's just an opinion if people are wondering how to tell their children. That I think is a good idea, to tell them individually so they can each.
That's really wise and it's really compassionate.
Yeah, and I guess it's trying to help them understand the treatment and the procedures that you go through and all the kind of like appointments that you have to make a decision about, and then it's about how much they can take on board, but it's about giving them a realistic idea of how things are, because again, like when anybody hears the word cancer, it's sort of like it can sometimes cause us to sort of catastrophize as well, can't it? And I suppose it's trying to comfort your children, but also give them a realistic understanding of what you might be going through. And was that quite difficult for you, Jennifer, in terms of like you don't want to sugarcoat it, but at the same time you want to protect them a little bit, I suppose?
Yes. Since they were different ages, I was the most realistic with my 19-year-old, so we understood things. It does have a very good outcome with the treatment, and I wanted him to know that. My 16-year-old has another thing just having to deal with. He has some severe anxiety issues. It came to a point where he refused to leave the house at all, and he still won't. He's homeschooled. He might leave to go to the store or something, but it's a real issue with him. And I knew he would freak out the most. And it was important he got individual attention in that so that we could give him the right attention and direction. And he still is the most afraid. Just his brain, it lies to him when having that severe anxiety, so it's hard. And then the youngest, we gave her minimum details, but that mom would be okay. And she's very much into the humor. So we use humor with her a lot. She likes to joke about mommy's bald head. I let her draw on it a few times just for fun of it. But anything to make it easier.
That's really loving of you.
I mean, they're the most important things.
Sure.
I mean,
Well,
my husband.
Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, my husband, he does everything for me, yet he gets probably the least amount of attention because he's an adult. And these children, I save all my energy for them.
Something I'm just curious with both of you is the question of sort of, like when you're dealing with both ME and cancer, and then the degree to which you have to sort of choose where you're gonna sort of allocate the few spoons you have, while dealing with medical stuff and dealing with family, and I'm curious to hear any thoughts you have on that, and then I'm probably going to have to go because I'm
just aware of the sort of time of it. We've been recording nearly an hour now, so we'll head towards wrapping it up. But it's been so sort of valuable in terms of conversation, hasn't it? So, sorry, I jumped in, Dove.
Jennifer, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm really sorry, but I forgot the question.
Do you want to frame that again, Dove? Because that was my fault. I jumped in.
Oh, just the question. I mean, it sounds like there is a lot of pressure to kind of make really careful decisions around how you're going to use the few spoons you have, and I'm just wondering, sort of, how do you navigate that? How do you navigate having to make choices between sort of like who you're going to give attention and care to, and then how do you take care of yourself? And
well, my 19-year-old doesn't want much, being that age. My 16-year-old is very, very still dependent on me for emotional supports. It's not that his daddy is bad, he just doesn't understand how to do it. And so he needs me for that. So sometimes I will have to push out those spoons to make sure he gets that support. The youngest just wants to physically be with me. So I tell her, if you can be quiet, you can have your phone and your headphones and not move around the bed, you can lay next to me and just be there with me. So that she gets that. And my husband has stepped up too, because I before this I did everything, and he's had to take care of everything. And he's also pushed aside his hobbies to spend more time with them, so that they feel that there's always a parent there that they can depend on. And my husband, it was forced upon us, but it worked out. He had to get a work from home job because I simply could not be alone. And I refuse to depend on my children too much.
Sure.
Only the barest minimum do I depend on them. But it worked out because he did find a good job that he enjoys, so it worked out.
Is there anything else anybody wants to add before we sort of wrap up? It's been, like I said, it's been so valuable, and I thank you so much, Jen, for sort of spending your sort of precious energy to talk to us, and the same for you, Litsa. It's been sort of two different stories, but very similar themes at times, and I think it's been something that will be a valuable sort of contribution. So, was there anything else that anybody wanted to add?
I would add two things when it comes to cancer. So often we'll hear people, when healthy people are discussing the person with cancer, you hear it framed that they won their battle with cancer or they lost their battle with cancer. And I think that's a false binary. And as Dove had said earlier, it puts the responsibility squarely on the person whose body is under attack. That, if you tried harder, maybe you would have won. I think I just assume when anyone's discussing any major illness that they're trying as hard as possible. Unless there's evidence to the contrary, I'm going to believe that person is doing all they can to effectively fight the illness. The other one that I would leave us with drives me nuts when when people are eulogizing someone or discussing them while they're still alive, whether it's any major illness, but you see this again with cancer a lot. They never complained. Well, we're not up for sainthood. If your body is just under attack and you're in extreme pain or you can't walk. When I had radiation treatment, I was too sick to shower for 45 days. I was fucking disgusting. Yeah, I complained about it because I looked like, my hair was just crazy and I couldn't put a bra on. I didn't have the strength. It's like, I was not enjoying this. I mean, I wasn't complaining unduly or anything. I didn't think I was living through a famine. But this idea that you're just, sanctified if you have cancer, but you didn't complain about it. Well, who made up that rule? That's just ridiculous. If you are going to have any kind of honest discussion about major illness, you're going to have to discuss the difficulties of it. Otherwise, we're all just sugarcoating it and it's not doing anything. So this is, I've told you this before, Daniel, but one of the great things about this podcast, we're exchanging scientific information, but also it allows all of us to feel less lonely.
If I could say just one more thing. For every person doing ME and going through cancer, to feel like they could choose what they want to do. And I don't know if this is okay to say, but if they want to use cancer as an out and not do any treatment, they shouldn't be judged for that.
Yeah.
Because so much of us want an out. And it's not even going to be an easy way out. So that's ridiculous to think. But of course, you can choose if you want to include that in the podcast.
It's got to be the person's decision. Yeah, that's well said.
That's all.
And it's about
nobody should be forced to fight a battle that they didn't choose to be in the first place.
Right.
Perfectly said.
And it's
Thank you, everyone, so very much. This was really, it's not easy material, but I think it's so important to be talking about, and I really appreciate your stories.